The woman who always smiled? The morning sun peeked through the dusty blinds of the tiny apartment as Claire tightened her ponytail and quietly slipped on her worn shoes. The kids were still asleep, curled up in the same bed under mismatched blankets. She kissed their foreheads gently, making sure not to wake them. Her fingers trembled slightly. The bills on the counter, the empty fridge, and the sound of eviction notices tapping the walls like ghosts. All of it weighed on her, but she carried it with the same strength she had every day for the past 4 years. Claire had never wanted to be a single mother, but life had other plans. When her husband left, no note, no goodbye, just a void, she picked up the pieces for her 2 young children. She took 2 jobs and never complained. The night shifts at the gas station and the early morning hours cleaning office buildings kept the lights on. Barely. But Claire had a rule. No matter what, she would smile. For her kids. For her own heart. Even for strangers, today was different, though. Claire had been called in early to her job at the downtown Plaza coffee shop. She walked the 3 miles in the cold, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. Her shoes were soaked by the time she arrived, but she quickly changed into her uniform, put on that tired but sincere smile, and tied her apron. "Morning, Claire," said Jenna, her coworker. "The manager's been acting weird, called in a couple people early today. Said something about reviewing performance." Claire nodded slowly. She knew what that meant. The owners had been talking about cutting costs. A few employees had already been let go. And Claire, despite being the most punctual and reliable, didn't have the availability they wanted. She couldn't stay late. She couldn't cover evening shifts. Not with 2 small kids waiting for her. As the morning rush poured in, Claire worked twice as hard. She remembered names. Gave free pastries to the homeless man who sat near the door every morning. Helped a customer clean up spilled coffee without hesitation. No one could say she wasn't kind, committed, or good at her job, but kindness doesn't always pay the rent. Around 10 a.m., the manager called her into the back. His face was stiff, unreadable. She sat quietly, heart pounding. "Claire, I'm really sorry to do this," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "We have to make some cuts and we've decided to let you go." Her smile cracked for the first time in years. I don't understand," she whispered. "I've never been late. I do everything." "It's not about that," he said quickly, almost ashamed. "It's just, the evening shifts are where we need people. You're great, but you're a mom," Claire heard, even if he didn't say it. She nodded. Not because she agreed, but because she didn't want to cry in front of him. Not again. She stood up slowly, the world tilting. She removed her apron, folded it neatly, and walked out into the shop. Jenna saw her face and immediately understood. "No," Jenna gasped. "They didn't." Claire nodded, this time not even trying to smile. "They did." Her hands shook as she stepped outside. The cold wind slapped her cheeks, mixing with the tears that finally broke free. She sat on the curb outside, unable to hide the sob that escaped her throat. People passed. Some glanced and quickly looked away. Others ignored her completely. But one person stopped. He wore a black motorcycle helmet, visor down, leather jacket zipped tight. He stood quietly for a moment, watching her, and then walked over. "Are you okay?" the stranger asked gently. Claire tried to wipe her face, embarrassed. "I'm fine, just a rough day." He didn't move, didn't press, just waited. "They let me go," she finally whispered. "I have 2 kids. I don't know how I'm going to tell them." The stranger slowly removed his helmet. His face came into view and Claire froze. It was Keanu Reeves, not someone who looked like him, not someone pretending. It was him, the real one. Her lips parted in shock and she tried to stand, confused and overwhelmed. Wait, is this?" He smiled softly, not with fame or ego, but with pure humanity. "I was inside," he said, his voice calm. "I saw what happened. I saw how hard you worked, and how no one stood up for you." Claire couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. Keanu sat beside her on the curb, holding the helmet in his lap like it was the most ordinary day in the world. "Look," he said, I don't usually get involved in these kinds of things, but this didn't sit right with me. Not one bit. I'm sorry, Claire said, her voice cracking. I didn't mean to cry like this, I don't know what to do. Keanu looked toward the coffee shop, then back at her. You don't have to know everything today, he said. You just have to breathe, one step at a time. She looked at him like she was trying to memorize his face, as if she might wake up and this moment would disappear. Why did you come out here? She asked. He gave her a small smile. Because sometimes, when no one else stands up, maybe, it's time someone did. A few minutes later, he stood and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small card and handed it to her. This is my manager's number. He helps with a lot of projects, quiet ones, nothing flashy. But I think we might have something for you. Claire stared at the card, lips trembling. Are you serious? Dead serious. He winked. Besides, he added, nodding toward her tear-streaked cheeks, you've got the kind of heart this world needs more of. Don't let them take that from you. And just like that, he put on his helmet, nodded once more, and walked back toward his bike. As the engine roared to life and Keanu rode off into the city, Claire stood there, still jobless, still unsure, but no longer hopeless, because something had changed, and it had only just begun. The man who watches quietly, the days that followed, felt like slow waves crashing on an already cracked shore. Claire sat at her kitchen table every morning, fingers curled around a chipped coffee mug with no coffee in it. The card Keanu had given her lay on the table beside her, untouched for 2 days. She stared at it often, sometimes picking it up and reading the name and number over and over, but fear held her hand still. What if it wasn't real? What if she called and someone laughed on the other end? Or worse, what if they expected something she couldn't give? Outside, the winter wind howled against the thin windows. Inside, her kids laughed faintly in the other room, playing with the same old toys they'd outgrown but didn't yet know how to leave behind. Claire hadn't told them what happened. She didn't have the strength. Every time they asked why, she wasn't working, she made up stories. They gave me a few days off. They're changing shifts. They want me back soon. Lies felt like armor when the truth was too heavy. On the third morning, she finally picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang once, then again. Then a voice, kind, professional, steady, answered. This is Matthew, the man said. Hi, Claire said, her voice quiet and unsure. I was given this number by someone. His name is Keanu. There was a pause, not cold, not suspicious, just a silence filled with quiet recognition. Yes, Matthew said. He told me. You might call. Claire, right? He knew her name. That surprised her more than anything. Yes, she said. He said you were someone we should meet. Can you come in this week? We have a small foundation. We help connect people with opportunities, especially people who've been overlooked. Yes, she said quickly. I can come today if needed. Matthew chuckled. Today is good. 2 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Claire hung up the phone and just sat there for a long time. Her heart thudded so loud she could barely hear the wind anymore. This wasn't a dream. She was going to meet someone because Keanu Reeves had seen her in a moment of complete vulnerability and decided she was worth something more, even if no one else had ever said so out loud. When she arrived at the small office later that afternoon, she wore her best clothes, even if they were 2 sizes too big and 5 years out of style. She walked in with her shoulders straight, reminding herself that no one in that place had seen her cry on a curb. Matthew met her with a warm smile. He wasn't what she expected. He wore jeans and a sweater, and his eyes were kind, not calculating. You made it, he said, offering a cup of real coffee. We're glad you did. Claire sat across from him and stared at the walls lined with framed photos. People holding certificates, people smiling, people hugging strangers, people who'd been seen. What is this place? She asked finally. It's called Still Human, Matthew said. It's something Keanu started quietly a few years ago. It helps people who've been stepped on by life. Not just financially, emotionally. People who've been fired, broken, ignored. People who think the world gave up on them. Why? Claire asked, unable to hide the disbelief in her voice. Matthew's smile deepened, but there was sadness, in his eyes too. Because he was one of them once, not in the same way maybe, but pain's a language we all understand in different dialects. He leaned forward slightly. He told me you didn't cry to get attention. You cried because you were tired, and still, you were polite, kind, even in that moment. He said you were someone who deserved a better story. Claire looked down at her hands. Her throat tightened. So, what now? She whispered. Now? Matthew said, handing her a folder. Now we help you build that story. We found a few things you might be great at. Nonprofits, community outreach roles, even a few writing gigs. Nothing overwhelming. Just a place to start. Claire opened the folder with trembling fingers. Job listings, schedules, names, real options. Not fantasy. You'll have training, Matthew added. We'll help with the kids too. We work with a few family organizations. You don't owe anything back. Except, maybe one day, you do this for someone else. Claire couldn't speak. Tears returned, but they were softer now, like a quiet rain after a storm that had wrecked the garden but spared the roots. As she walked out of the office later that day, the sky had turned silver and soft. Clouds rolled overhead like blankets, and something inside her finally loosened. It wasn't over. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Meanwhile, across the city, in a quiet room with dark walls and a single candle burning on a shelf, Keanu Reeves sat alone. He scrolled through old photographs of people whose lives he had quietly touched. Some had never known it was him. Some had sent letters, drawings, photos of their new homes or jobs. He didn't keep them for pride. He kept them to remind himself of a promise he made long ago. He didn't want applause. He didn't want headlines. He just wanted people to know, you're not alone, even when the world pretends you are. His phone buzzed. A message from Matthew. She came. Keanu smiled. In a world full of noise, sometimes the most powerful thing is standing up for a stranger, especially when they think no one sees them. And Claire, the woman who once wept on a curb, had just taken her first step into the rest of her life. The day everything shifted, the weeks that followed weren't perfect, but they were different. Claire's mornings began with purpose instead of panic. Each sunrise still carried the heaviness of unpaid bills and long to-do lists, but something inside her had shifted. It wasn't just the job opportunities or the warm office of the Still Human Foundation. It was the quiet, lingering memory of a man who didn't just see her pain, but acknowledged it, not as weakness, not as drama, but as proof that she was still fighting. Her children noticed it too. Her daughter Mia, age 6, started waking up with a smile again, no longer asking, "Mommy, do you have to leave so early?" And little Jude, barely 4, began drawing pictures of their family in colorful crayons. Only now, Claire was always smiling in his drawings, not with tired eyes or bowed shoulders, but with light radiating from her. The job training Claire received at the foundation came with more than just practical skills. It came with people who believed in her, volunteers and mentors who had their own broken paths but still showed up to guide others. Some were once addicts, others had escaped domestic abuse, and a few had been homeless. Each story was stitched, with pain, but now those stitches held something together instead of tearing it apart. One day, during a small group workshop, Claire shared a part of her story. Her voice trembled at first, but as the room leaned in, really leaned in like her words mattered, she let it all out. The nights she had gone without dinner so her kids could eat. The job interviews where her single mom status was met with fake smiles and fast rejections. The silence of an apartment that echoed with loneliness after bedtime. When she finished, no one applauded. Instead, a woman named Rita reached out and gently took Claire's hand. "You're not broken," Rita whispered. "You're rebuilding. That's different. And Claire realized she had never once cried in front of strangers and felt stronger afterward, until now. But the most unexpected part came one afternoon, 3 weeks into her new part-time position at a youth shelter, one of the opportunities the foundation had set up for her. The work was challenging. The stories she heard from the teens were rough, sometimes even darker than her own. But she met each one with the same heart she had shown that morning in the coffee shop, when she gave the last muffin to a hungry man outside. On that afternoon, the center director approached her with an odd look. "You've got a visitor," she said, confused. "Says he knows you. Wouldn't give a name." Claire stepped outside, expecting a neighbor or maybe someone from the foundation. But the sight that met her eyes made her stop in her tracks. There he was, the same black motorcycle, helmet, the same soft steps, Keanu Reeves. Again. This time he removed the helmet even before reaching her. "Hi," he said simply. Claire blinked twice, unsure if she was seeing right. "You came back?" "I never left," he said gently. I like to check in quietly," she smiled. It was a different smile now, not forced, not painted over pain. It was real. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." They walked together to a nearby bench in silence. The city buzzed around them, but in that moment it all felt distant, removed. Like the noise, knew better than to interrupt what was unfolding. "I heard you've been helping kids," he said after a while. "I try," Claire said, her voice steady. "They remind me of what's still good, even when things aren't." Keanu nodded, eyes scanning the sky. "When I was young," he began slowly, "I lost a lot. My father. My best friend. Later, someone I loved more than life. And for a long time I walked around thinking pain was the only thing that was real." Claire listened, every word sinking deep into places in her that still ached. "But I realized something," Keanu continued. "Pain isn't proof of failure. It's proof we cared. It means something mattered." He looked at her then, fully. "You matter, Claire. Your pain, your story, your strength. It all matters." She felt the tears again. But they were different now. Not sharp, not humiliating. They were warm. They were healing. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just keep going. And when you're strong enough, lift someone else." A few moments passed before Claire laughed quietly. "You know, my daughter asked me the other day if I was a superhero. Said I looked like one when I came home from work." "You are," Keanu said without hesitation. "She's just the first to see it." He handed her a small envelope before standing. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Just something to make things a little easier," he replied. "Keanu, I can't—" "It's not charity," he interrupted gently. "It's gratitude for reminding me why I do this." He smiled again, this time with something behind it: memory, sorrow, hope. Then he put on his helmet and disappeared once more into the hum of the city. Claire opened the envelope only after he was gone. Inside was a handwritten note and a check, enough to cover her rent for 6 months. But it wasn't the check that made her cry. It was the last line in the note: "Keep shining, even when no one's watching." Especially then. And Claire, for the first time in years, believed she could. When whispers turn into waves, the seasons began to shift, and with them, so did Claire. The sharp chill of winter softened into the muddy thaw of early spring, and for the first time in years, Claire wasn't counting down days with dread. Her calendar, once filled with overdue notices and job applications, now held appointments that excited her: volunteer projects, parent meetings at her children's school, and training sessions that made her feel like a person again instead of just a survivor. At the youth center, Claire became more than just an employee. She became a presence, a steady one. The teens there, most of them hardened by years of neglect and betrayal, slowly started seeking her out. Not just for help with homework or to check in, but for something deeper. Connection. She never pried into their stories. She didn't need to. She knew the language of pain, and sometimes just sitting beside someone in silence said more than any therapy session. One girl, Marissa, barely 17, would sit across from Claire every Thursday afternoon and braid her own hair in silence while Claire filed papers. Week after week, not a single word spoken. Until one day, Marissa asked softly, "Did your mom love you?" Claire's hands paused. Her eyes met Marissa's. "She tried," Claire said truthfully. "But some people don't know how to give love when they've never been shown it themselves." Marissa didn't say anything else, but the next week she handed Claire a drawing, a portrait of Claire holding two small children drawn in bright marker strokes. Beneath it were the words, "You look like the kind of mom I wish I had." Claire cried that night, but they were the good kind again. Meanwhile, the Still Human Foundation began receiving letters, not from people who had been helped, but from people who wanted to help. Word had somehow gotten out. Nothing viral, nothing splashy. Just quiet stories passed, from one hand to another, a friend who had a friend who knew a man who once sat beside a stranger in need. And always, somewhere in the middle of those stories, was a man with a helmet. Keanu never asked for attention. But attention has a way of finding those who deserve it most. One day, Matthew approached Claire at the Foundation's downtown office with something unusual in his eyes. Hesitation. "Someone asked to meet you," he said carefully. "Someone important." Claire blinked. "Important how?" Matthew handed her a plain invitation. Elegant, understated. The kind you'd expect for a museum gala or private film premiere. "This is for a speaking event," he said. "A charity dinner. They want you to talk about your journey." Claire felt the room tilt. "Me? I'm not that kind of person." Matthew smiled. "You're exactly that kind of person." The night of the dinner, Claire stood backstage, in a long black dress borrowed from a volunteer. Her knees shook and her hands felt too big for her body. Out in the audience were business leaders, celebrities, philanthropists, and people who wore their lives like polished trophies. And somewhere among them, Claire didn't even need to guess, sat Keanu. The host called her name. She stepped into the light. At first, all she could hear was her own breath, too loud, too fast. But then she looked into the audience and saw one thing that grounded her. A child, a little girl, maybe 10, sitting with her mother in the front row, her eyes wide, her chin resting on her hands, watching Claire like she was waiting to hear a bedtime story. And Claire began. She didn't recite anything rehearsed. She didn't quote famous speeches. She just told the truth. About the cold mornings. About walking miles to work. About being fired while trying to hold everything together. About crying on a curb outside a coffee shop while the world walked. And about the moment a man in a helmet sat beside her and didn't try to fix her, but saw her. As she spoke, the room changed. It wasn't grand. It wasn't flashy. It was real. People leaned forward. A few wiped their eyes. One man put down his phone and simply listened. When she finished, there was no roaring applause. There was only silence, followed by the sound of someone rising to their feet. Keanu Reeves. He stood, his hands in his pockets, eyes not filled with pride, but with peace. And slowly, the room followed. A standing ovation. Not for a celebrity, not for a foundation, but for a mother who kept going. After the dinner, Claire found Keanu outside in the quiet garden behind the building, staring up at the stars. "You told your story," he said, not turning. "I did," she replied, stepping beside him. "I didn't think I could, but I did." "You didn't just speak," he said. "You reminded people what courage looks like." They stood there in silence, watching the wind move through the trees. "Do you ever wish you could be invisible? Again?" Claire asked suddenly. Keanu nodded. "Sometimes. But then I remember, sometimes the ones who feel invisible are the ones who need to be seen most." She smiled. Like me? Exactly like you. He turned to her then, his expression softer than she had ever seen. Claire, this is only the beginning. What you've done, it's bigger than you know. And deep inside, Claire believed it. Not because she was special, but because she had survived long enough to stand up and speak when her voice once trembled. Echoes that never fade. The months drifted on like quiet verses of a song no one had heard, in full yet. Claire, once the woman who sat on a curb with nothing but sorrow in her chest, now moved with a quiet confidence, like someone who had touched the bottom of the ocean and floated back up with sea glass wisdom in her pockets. The speech she gave at the charity dinner had rippled farther than anyone expected. People began reaching out to the foundation, some with money, others with stories. Women, single fathers, veterans, young people who felt lost in the static of the world. But there was one letter that changed everything. It arrived in a pale envelope, addressed simply to Still Human, for Claire. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman named Annette, who lived 3 states away. She had been a nurse before a car accident left her in a wheelchair. The hospital laid her off 2 months after she returned. Her husband left shortly after. She wrote that she had been seconds away from giving up completely, until she heard Claire's story in a podcast that had picked up the audio from the charity event. Your voice reached me when nothing else could, Annette had written. Not because you had the answers, but because you showed me that pain doesn't get the final word. Claire read the letter 3 times before folding it gently and pressing it to her chest. It didn't matter if no one else ever clapped again. Annette had hurt her, really hurt her, and now Annette was fighting again. That was enough. Meanwhile, Claire's work at the youth shelter had become more than a job. It was a calling. She helped organize weekly creative workshops, brought in local speakers, and even started a journaling club for the teens. At first, only 2 kids showed up. By the 3rd week, there weren't enough chairs. They called it ink therapy, and Claire told them, "What you write doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be honest." Some of the most hardened kids, the ones who walked around with invisible armor stitched from years of betrayal, slowly began opening up, not always with words, sometimes with drawings, other times with songs written in the margins of notebooks. But Claire saw them, just as someone had once seen her. But despite all the progress, Claire still carried something deep and restless within her. Gratitude, yes, but also a question that never seemed to leave. Why me? Why had Keanu Reeves, a man known all over the world, chosen to stop for her on that cold morning? One evening, after a long day at the shelter, she found herself walking past the same coffee shop where everything had changed. It looked different now, newer, renovated. But the sidewalk was still cracked in the same place she had once wept, alone. She sat there again, this time with her head held high, her heart steadier. And then she heard it, the low purr of a motorcycle engine. She turned. Black helmet, leather jacket, the same easy gait. He took off the helmet and smiled when he saw her. "This bench looks familiar," Keanu said, nodding. "You have a habit of showing up exactly when I need to figure something out," Claire said with a smirk. "Maybe it's the bench," he teased. "Maybe it's magic," she laughed. It was the kind of laugh she hadn't known in years. Unforced, full. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a pause. "Of course. Why me? I'm not special. There are so many people who've suffered more, who've lost more." Keanu looked down, then back at her with a gaze full of memory. "Years ago," he began, "I sat beside a man on a hospital bench. He didn't know who I was. He was crying, because his daughter had just passed away. He told me he hadn't cried. In 30 years, he felt ashamed, like it made him weak." Keanu's voice softened. "I told him that sometimes the strongest people cry when no one's looking, because their heart can't lie anymore. And he said something to me that I never forgot." "What?" Claire asked, leaning in. "He said, 'Thank you for not walking away.'" Keanu turned to her then, his voice steady. "I saw you crying on that bench, Claire. And something in me recognized that kind of sorrow, the kind that isn't asking for help, but hoping for it, silently. I didn't stop because you were special. I stopped because you were human, and I think maybe the world needs to remember how to treat each other like that again. Claire felt tears spring to her eyes, but she didn't look away this time. You changed my life, she whispered. You saved your own, he said. I just reminded you what you were worth. He stood up then, helmet under his arm, and looked at the horizon where the sky was melting into soft gold. You know, he added, the foundation wants to expand. We need someone to help run the West Coast branch, someone who knows what it's like to rise without forgetting the fall. Claire's eyes widened. Me? You? But don't say you're not ready, he said, smiling. You were ready the moment you stood up from that curb. He gave her a quiet nod, then stepped toward his bike. Besides, he said over his shoulder, I hear there's a little girl out there who already thinks you're a superhero. You might want to live up to it. As he rode off, the streetlight above her flickered to life, casting a soft glow over the sidewalk, the same cracked sidewalk where she had once broken apart. But now, she was whole. And this time, she wasn't going to stop at surviving. She was going to lead. The light they never saw coming spring turned to summer, and the city bloomed with a warmth that felt more than seasonal. It felt spiritual, as if the sidewalks themselves remembered the stories they once held. And in one quiet corner of that city, behind a modest glass door with a hand-painted wooden sign that read, Still Human, West Branch, a new chapter began to unfold. Claire stood at the heart of it, no longer just a survivor of her own story, but a guide for others still finding the words for theirs. The West Coast branch wasn't fancy. The chairs didn't match, and the carpet had a stubborn stain near the entrance that no one could scrub out. But it was alive. The walls bore murals painted by former shelter kids. The air buzzed with laughter, tears, and the shuffling of lives being pieced back together. People came from everywhere. Some whispered their names, others refused to give them. But they all shared one thing in common. They were seen. Claire made sure of that. She greeted everyone personally. She remembered birthdays. She sat through court dates and hospital visits. She laughed with those who forgot how to, and sat in silence with those who weren't ready to speak. She didn't wear a cape, but the weight of every broken soul that walked through her door sat gently on her shoulders, and she carried them with grace. Her children, Mia and Jude, thrived too. They now walked through the halls of the foundation, after school weaving between people like they belonged there, which they did. They made cards for the newcomers. Sometimes they left them on chairs before anyone arrived. Notes scrawled in crayon that read, "You are not alone," or "You're stronger than yesterday." No one had taught them that. They had simply learned it by watching their mother. But the world beyond the foundation hadn't gone silent. News of Claire's journey had begun to echo, softly, respectfully. A well-known journalist wrote a piece titled, "The Woman Keanu Didn't Save, Because She Saved Herself." The article went viral, not because of the celebrity angle, but because it reminded people that behind every statistic, every cold headline, is a story that still has chapters left. Offers came in, book deals, TV shows, speaking tours. Claire turned them all down, not out of fear, not out of doubt, but because she believed some stories were meant to be lived more than performed. Still, she wrote, late at night, after the kids were asleep, she would sit by her window with a notebook and pen and pour out the moments that shaped her, the ones the world never saw, the nights she screamed into a pillow so her children wouldn't hear, the way Keanu looked at her without pity, only understanding, the way it felt to finally believe she deserved something good. One day as she walked through the foundation's front doors with an armful of donated books, she froze. He was standing there again, black helmet under one arm. Casual jacket, that same presence, calm and rooted, like someone who'd seen storms and learned to walk through them without rushing. "Keanu." He smiled as she approached. "You always seem to know when I need a reminder," Claire said, setting down the books. "And you always look taller each time I see you," he replied with a playful grin. It's the heels, she teased. No, he said, more serious now. It's the strength. They sat in her tiny office, which doubled as a storage room. A flickering lamp cast golden light on the walls covered in handprints and pinned letters. Claire offered him tea. He accepted. I'm proud of you, he said quietly after a moment. Thank you, she replied. But I still don't feel like I've done enough. You've done something most people never do, he said. You've turned pain into purpose, and then gave that purpose away like a gift. Claire leaned back, her eyes misty. Do you ever get tired? She asked. Of carrying so much? Keanu nodded. Every day. But I rest knowing that even small kindnesses ripple in ways we'll never see. They sat in silence after that, listening to the muffled laughter of kids outside the window, the rustle of papers, the steady pulse of something sacred. Hope in motion. As he stood to leave, Claire handed him a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a keychain shaped like a helmet. Her daughter had painted it herself. Mia made it, Claire said. She wanted you to have something to remind you that you're not alone either. Keanu turned it over in his hand. For a man used to receiving awards, autographs, and spotlights, this tiny gesture clearly meant more than any gold statue. Tell her thank you, he said, voice thick with emotion. It's perfect. He paused at the door. You know, Claire, he said without turning, one day someone will sit on a bench like you did, and you'll be the one who stops. You'll take off the helmet, and they'll see a woman who reminds them that even broken roads can lead somewhere beautiful. Claire smiled, her chest full and steady. I already have, she said. He looked back, his eyes meeting hers one last time. Then keep going, he said, because the world still needs more people who remember what it feels like to be invisible and choose to see anyway. He stepped outside, the door clicking gently shut behind him. But Claire remained still for a moment longer, eyes closed, listening not to the silence but to the legacy of one small moment that changed everything, from a stranger on a curb, to the stranger who stood up, to the woman who now stood for everyone else. And just like that, she picked up her notebook and wrote the next line. Kindness never ends, it only passes hands.